They told me the war ended in 1945. They were wrong. It just stopped. And now, it stopped for me. The cold in the mountains is like a hammer. It doesn't just chill you. It hits you until your ribs feel like they might break. I stopped for a second. I leaned on my trekking pole and took a deep breath. My name is Lukas Steiner. I'm 38 years old, but after 12 years in the Army, my joints feel twice that age. I don't have much waiting for me back in the city. No wife, no kids, just a quiet apartment and a job I don't like. I'm better at being a soldier than being a civilian. The air was so cold it burned my throat. My heart was beating fast, but I was in control. 80 beats per minute. That's good. That's steady. I come to these mountains to get away from the noise. Ever since I left the service, my ears won't stop ringing. The doctors call it tinnitus, a souvenir from a bomb that hit my convoy years ago. In a crowded room, I can't hear anything but that high-pitched scream. But up here, where the world is empty and silent, the ringing finally stops. I can finally just be me. But today, the silence was ending. The sky wasn't just gray anymore. It looked like a dirty bruise. The wind had changed. It wasn't just blowing, it was screaming. It started throwing ice and snow into my face. Within seconds, I couldn't see anything. A whiteout had started. I couldn't see the path. I couldn't even see my own boots. Keep moving, I told myself. In the Army, you learn that panic kills. Discipline keeps you alive. I needed to find a place to hide from the wind, or I would freeze to death in minutes. I pushed forward, sinking into the deep snow. My fingers were getting numb inside my gloves. My breath was coming in short, panic gasps. Suddenly, I tripped. My leg hit something hard hidden under the snow. I fell face first into a drift. I cursed and rolled over, trying to catch my breath. I reached down to see what I hit. It wasn't a rock. It was cold, rusted metal. I dug into the snow with my hands. I found a pipe sticking out of the ground. It was a ventilation pipe. If there's a vent, there's a room underneath. I pulled out my small shovel and started digging like a madman. A few feet away, I hit something solid. Concrete. I dug for 10 more minutes until I found the edge of a door. It was a massive iron door built into the side of the mountain. I realized what it was. An old World War II bunker. People said these mountain fortresses were just legends, but I was looking right at one. There was no handle, just a big metal wheel covered in thick ice. I put my boot against the wall and pulled the wheel with everything I had. The metal made a terrible, screeching sound that echoed across the peaks. Finally, it moved. I pushed the door open. It was incredibly heavy. I stumbled inside and collapsed on the floor. I kicked the door shut. Immediately, the sound of the wind disappeared. It was replaced by a silence so deep it made my ears pop. I turned on my headlamp. The light cut through the dark. I was in a small concrete room. Ahead of me was another open door leading deeper into the mountain. It smelled like old metal, wet dust, and something else, something stale, like a room that had been closed for 80 years. I stood up, shaking. I was safe from the storm. "All clear," I whispered. My voice sounded small in the dark, but as my heart slowed down, my old soldier instincts kicked in. I felt a chill on the back of my neck that had nothing to do with the snow. I was out of the storm, but I was also trapped inside a mountain. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there, listening to my own breathing. The bunker was dead silent. In the Army, silence is usually a good thing. It means no one is shooting. But this silence felt different. It felt like the mountain was pressing down on me. I pulled out my small camping stove and a tin of soup. I needed to stay warm. I found an old wooden desk in the corner. It was rotting, but it was better than the floor. I set up my gear with military precision. Backpack on the left, stove in the middle, flashlight on the right. As the soup heated up, I looked around. The walls were covered in a thin layer of ice. On the desk, I found a leather book. The cover was cracked and dusty. I wiped it clean. It was a logbook from 1945. I flipped through the pages. Most of it was boring, reports about fuel and food. But the last few pages were strange. There were no words, just rows and rows of tally marks scratched deep into the paper. Hundreds of them. They looked desperate, like someone was counting the seconds because they had nothing else left. The smell hit me then. It wasn't just a soup. It was a sharp smell, like burnt wires and wet wool. It reminded me of the hospital after the bomb. Then I heard it. Thud, scrape, thud. It was coming from the ventilation shaft above my head. It sounded like something heavy was being dragged through the metal pipe. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it up. The metal grate was rusted shut. Nothing was there, but the sound didn't stop. It just moved further down the hallway, deeper into the bunker. Just the wind, I whispered, but there was no wind down here. I felt exhausted. The mountain air and the stress were catching up to me. I checked my watch. 11 p.m. I decided to close my eyes for just an hour. I leaned my head against my backpack. I drifted into a shallow sleep. I dreamed of a man standing in the corner of the room, wearing an old uniform, his face covered in shadows. He was counting. I snapped my eyes open. My heart was racing. I felt like I had been asleep for a long time. I looked at my watch to see how much time I had lost. 11:04 p.m. I waited. I watched the digital seconds tick by. 58, 59, 00. The minute hand didn't move. It stayed at 11:04 p.m. I shook my wrist, thinking the battery was dying, but the digital display was bright and clear. I waited another full minute. 11:04 p.m. The air in the room suddenly felt freezing. The quiet hours were over. The long night had officially begun. I stood up and grabbed my tactical knife. My hands were shaking, but as soon as my fingers wrapped around the handle, the shaking stopped. I was a soldier again. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew how to defend a room. Boom! The heavy iron door, the one I had bolted shut, vibrated. Something had hit it from the outside. Not the wind. The wind pushes. This was a strike, a rhythmic, heavy punch. Boom, boom, boom. The metal began to groan. I shined my light at the door. The thick iron was actually starting to bend inward, just a little bit, as if something incredibly strong was leaning its weight against it. "Who's there?" I shouted. My voice felt thin. No one answered. The pounding stopped. But then a new sound started. It was a high-pitched whistling, like a radio searching for a signal. It was coming from a rusted speaker on the wall that I hadn't even noticed before. A voice came through the static. It was speaking German, but it sounded old, like a recording from a different lifetime. It was reading out coordinates and names. My name wasn't on the list, but the voice sounded like it was talking directly into my brain. I pulled a flare from my bag and cracked it. Bright red light filled the room, pushing the shadows back. I needed to see everything. That's when I noticed the walls. They weren't just cold anymore. A thick, white liquid was starting to leak from the cracks in the concrete. It looked like milk, but it was heavy and smelled like old chemicals. People in the mountains call this alpine milk when it's just mineral runoff, but this felt alive. It was crawling across the floor toward my boots. I looked at my watch again. 11:04 p.m. The air was getting thick. It was getting harder to breathe, like the oxygen was being sucked out of the room. I realized I couldn't stay in the entrance. The door was going to break, and the white liquid was trapping me. The pounding on the door started again, faster this time. Crack! The top hinge of the door snapped. A freezing blast of snow, and something else began to whistle through the gap. I didn't wait to see what was on the other side. I grabbed my pack and ran through the second bulkhead, deeper into the mountain. I found a set of concrete stairs leading down. The darkness below was absolute. It felt like walking into the mouth of a giant. I looked back one last time. The red light of my flare showed the iron door finally flying open. But there was no snowstorm behind it. There was only a wall of solid, moving darkness. I turned and ran down the stairs, deeper into the belly of the bunker. The stairs felt like they went on for miles. My flashlight beam was getting weak, flickering every few seconds. I reached the bottom and found a massive room. It was the heart of the bunker, the generator room. Huge, rusted machines stood like frozen giants in the dark. They were humming. It was a low, vibrating sound that made my teeth ache. I walked deeper into the room. My light hit something in the corner. It was a row of chairs. People were sitting in them. I raised my knife, ready to fight, but they didn't move. They were wearing the old gray uniforms of the 1940s. But they weren't skeletons. Their skin looked like gray leather, stretched tight over their bones. They were hooked up to the machines with thick, black cables that went into their necks. Their eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them, just that same white, milky liquid. They weren't dead, but they weren't alive either. They were part of the bunker. The humming got louder. I looked at my watch. 11:04 p.m. Still, I knew then that the bunker was a machine designed to stop time. It was a trap that had been running for 80 years, and now it had caught me. The only way to start the world again was to break the machine. I didn't have explosives, but I had my camping stove and 2 extra canisters of pressurized fuel. I jammed the canisters into the main control panel of the generator. I cracked my last flare and taped it to the side. "Time to wake up," I whispered. I turned and ran. I didn't use a stays. I found a narrow ventilation ladder and started climbing. I heard a muffled whump below me. Then a massive explosion rocked the mountain. The humming stopped. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. The air suddenly rushed back into my lungs. I climbed until my fingers hit soft snow. I pushed through, crawling out a hole in the side of the mountain. The storm was gone. The sky was beautiful, pale blue. The sun was just starting to peek over the jagged peaks. I fell onto my back in the snow, laughing and gasping for air. The cold felt wonderful. It felt real. I hiked down the mountain for hours until I reached the edge of a small village. I saw the lights of a cafe. I saw people walking. I made it. I was safe. I sat down on a bench and looked at my watch. I wanted to see the numbers move. My heart was pounding. The digital display flickered. 11:04 p.m., then 11:05 p.m. I let out a long breath. But then the watch stopped again. I looked at the people in the village. They weren't moving anymore. A bird was frozen in the sky above me. I looked at my hands. They were turning gray, the color of old leather. I looked into the glass of a shop window. My eyes weren't blue anymore. They were white, filled with the alpine milk from the bunker. I hadn't escaped the long night. I had just brought it down the mountain with me.